Welcome, everyone. My name is Henrique Passini. I work for UNCTAD. This is a roundtable session on the role of exports in manufacturing pollution in developing countries. This session is based on a report produced by Instituto 17 for UNCTAD as part of the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Program sponsored by FCDO. We would like to thank the Instituto 17 for its efforts in the performance in developing the study, also for FCDO for its contribution to the program. Today's roundtable will be structured in three parts: an opening remarks, a first panel discussing life cycle analysis aspects of exports, and a second panel discussing governance aspects, both public and private governance aspects of exports, and how those governance aspects can help tackle the issue of pollution. Finally, I'll go straight to the speakers of this opening panel. First, the representative from FCDO, Mr. Jonathan Hassall, will have the words. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrique. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Just to reiterate what Enrique just said in the introduction there, I'd like to thank Instituto 17 under the guidance of UNCTAD and supported by the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office for preparing this important report on the role of exports in manufacturing pollution in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. The report contributes to the UK's Sustainable Manufacturing Environmental Pollution Programme, known as SMEP, an over £20 million investment by the UK government in partnership with UNCTAD that is tackling the problem of pollution generated by manufacturing in developing countries. Throughout, the SMEP programme has strongly benefited from the partnership with UNCTAD, and we welcome this continuing partnership for the programme. The findings of this report and this event are part of an important process for SMEP. SMEP involves the production of information, the support of innovation, market uptake of solutions, and technical assistance for developing countries. This report in particular has highlighted the role of exports in manufacturing pollution, providing a valuable contribution to our understanding to what sectors we should focus our efforts into, like food and beverages manufacturing and also textiles manufacturing. By focusing in on sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, we can support better practice and innovation in these economies that have increased their manufacturing exports in recent years. This report, alongside other SMEP activities, is continuing to further emphasise the importance of tackling various pollutants at source, not just carbon dioxide. And in this, there is valuable opportunity for further enabling sustainable development, for instance, by taking a circular economy approach. This report by Instituto 17 in particular is expected to feed into our strategy for the SMEP programme and action regarding solutions on manufacturing pollution in the coming year. But I'd like to end on one more important point. This report also brings another important message to us. As we become increasingly conscious of where goods come from and how they are produced, tackling pollution linked to production and exports is a shared responsibility between producing countries and those who buy the goods. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I really look forward to a rich discussion. Back to you, Enrique.
Thank you, Jonathan. And now, on behalf of UNCTAD, I'll pass the word to Robert Hamwey.
Thank you, Enrique, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important workshop. I would like to start off by saying that since the establishment of the Uruguay, the conclusion of the Uruguay round and the establishment of the WTO in 1995, there's been a lot of export-oriented growth that has been undertaken within developing countries. And with that growth, there's been a growing concern to look at what are the environmental impacts of trade liberalization on the environment. And so in the UN and in my work at UNCTAD over the past 20 years, we've looked at some of these impacts of trade on the environment. We've looked in developing countries at the agriculture sector, the forestry sector, fisheries, aquaculture. And in general, there's been a number of studies done in these sectors. However, very little has been done in manufacturing, but SMEP is now changing that. SMEP wants to look at what are the impacts of trade liberalization on the environment within the manufacturing sector in developing countries. And so this is an important addition. So since 2018, SMEP opened this research door to look at the environmental impacts of manufacturing in developing countries. A scoping study was completed by the Stockholm Environment Institute and the University of York for the SMEP program 2019. And they identified a number of impacts that are substantial and significant, including in the mining sector, textile sector, food processing, chemicals, and other manufacturing sectors, where there's been little previous work. So this is an important addition to the knowledge base that we have to look at how to possibly reduce and better manage environmental impacts in the manufacturing sector in developing countries. So I-17 now fills this gap, this research gap, with this important study that they're presenting today. I look forward to learning what they've uncovered, the lessons learned in the countries that they've taken a look at, textile sector and food processing sectors. And so I think it's very important to see what we can do with private sector governance and public sector governance in order to reduce pollution from manufacturing. So certainly the SMEP program will use these findings as it moves forward and goes deeper into this examination, and also tries to take these lessons to countries through technical assistance in the next coming years in order to assist policymakers and private sector manufacturing operators on ways that they can reduce pollution from manufacturing. So thank you for the opportunity to make these few comments. Thank you, Enrique.
Thank you, Robert. And now I'll give the word to the director of Instituto 17, Alessandro Sanches-Pereira, the lead coordinator of the report. Alessandro.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Robert and Jonathan, for the welcoming. And greetings from Brazil to everyone who's watching us now. For I-17, it was a quite smart and important point in our career to be part of SMEP. Not just because we believe in the change that we can bring with the database and data that we can provide, but also the collaboration South-South, which is important. Countries that has different experience, but passing through the same route to help each other and improve. So the report shows how important is life cycle analysis assessment to understand the impact of development. And something that we truly believe is that we can leapfrog from past experience for new process for cleaning productions in those countries. We don't need to repeat the mistakes. And I think the report shows that. And it takes a village. And I would like to show the number of people that has been involved in this process. So it's more than 30 people has worked in this report, from I-17 to UNCTAD, FCDO, and partners that help us to build this database. And something that it's quite important for us is that we need to look at this as a building block for improving with other reports and strengthening the country's actions and move towards a more cleaner production. Thank you so much for this event.
Thank you, Alessandro. Much appreciated. And now, without further ado, I'll give the word to the moderator of the first panel, Mr. Blaise Dobson, who will moderate the panel on the first part of this roundtable on the life cycle impacts of manufacturing exports. The word is yours, Blaise.
Thanks so much, Enrique, and wonderful to be here to moderate this section of the panel discussion. As Enrique outlined earlier, there are going to be two parts to this. I'll facilitate the first. And I think first, in order to kick us off, and it would be really great to hear from Marcelo, who was the co-author of this report, and maybe to present on some of the life cycle aspects of the selected exports from sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and the particular case countries that were selected for analysis: the United Republic of Tanzania, Kenya, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and to briefly discuss some of the learnings that have come through from the report. And then we'll open up to a discussion with some of the other distinguished guests that we have here to reflect on some of those findings. So over to you.
Good morning or afternoon. Okay, I'm just going to share the presentation now. I'm not seeing my presentation, but I'm trying to share it. Can you see the presentation? I'm sorry, I'm having a problem sharing the presentation. Yes, I need help. I'm not being able to share it. Let me see. I'll try to do it again. Okay, I think now it's processing. So let's start introducing myself. I'm Marcela Lange from I-17. I was one of the authors of the report and have worked performing the life cycle assessment, which gave insights into the role of exports in manufacturing pollution in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Today, I am presenting some of the results of this part of the study. Okay, so at first, I'd like to show you, to talk a little bit about the trade manufacturing pollution nexus. When developing countries export products, these products were produced somewhere. Actually, they were produced at these sources, these industries which are the sources, and this production leaves important pollution impacts at the source. These pollution impacts can cause effects not only at the environment, but also in human health. To understand these effects, these impacts and the effects that they cause is a very important step. And life cycle assessment is a possible methodological approach that can be used in order to do that. When you look at the life cycle perspective, we consider all the production steps that go through from the raw materials extraction, passing through the manufacturing, the distribution, the usage, and the disposal or recycling, the end of life of a product. I'm sorry. When we look at when a product is exported, it was already produced. When it's produced, there are direct emissions that result from this production. But this production also depends on inputs, raw materials, processed materials, water, energy that come from the supply chain. So both stages, from since raw materials extraction to the production phase, all these stages represent the potential impacts that are left behind when manufactured goods are exported. And when we look at the production phase specifically, these direct emissions that happen there they necessarily remain in the country when the manufactured products are exported. The whole stages from raw materials production to manufacturing, until the factory gate, are considered for us as a cradle-to-gate perspective. And when we look at the production phase specifically, we consider it in our study as the gate-to-gate perspective. So now I'm going to present you some of our results looking to the target countries, target map countries from these two perspectives. Here at this graph, you can see the exports-driven pollution in Bangladesh. This graph was prepared using an input-output life cycle assessment approach based on export data from ITC and an input-output database called Exhiobase3. We can see here that the most important, the most relevant categories when we talk about the cradle-to-gate perspective, when I say cradle-to-gate perspective, I'm referring to the main potential impacts left behind when manufactured goods are exported, as we talked before at the later slide. The most important impact categories are human non-carcinogenic toxicity, water consumption, land use, terrestrial ecotoxicity, and freshwater eutrophication. We can see here that from a cradle-to-gate perspective, the textile sector is a very relevant sector, is the most relevant one. When we look at it from a gate-to-gate perspective, and now I am referring to the main potential impacts that remain locally when manufactured products are exported, we have as relevant categories human non-carcinogenic toxicity, ozone formation, human health, marine ecotoxicity, terrestrial ecotoxicity, and global warming. And here, from this perspective, we can also see that the textile sector is a very relevant one, but also the yellow one, which is the chemical sector, shows a relevance as well. The textile sector, because of its environmental relevance, but also because of data availability and economic relevance that are not going to be discussed at this presentation, was the choice to be studied for the report. The textile industry is well known for its use of harmful chemicals, high consumption of water and energy, and also for the generation of large amounts of solid and gaseous wastes. After selecting the sector, the textile sector, then we started to have a closer look to the impacts related to this specific sector, and for that we've chosen a relevant product, exported product. The product was jute yarn, which represent 84% of the exports, the textiles export quantities in 2019. When we look at the different impact categories related to this product life cycle, we can see that the jute fiber production is the most relevant stage. This is particularly important when we talk about land use due to the farming activities, but also when we look at the marine ecotoxicity. This is because of the fertilizers and pesticides used during cultivation. But even if, I forgot to say that these are the results that were produced using process-based life cycle assessment and using well-known inventory, lifecycle inventory databases. When even if jute fiber production is the most relevant stage, we can have a closer look to the other stages: wastewater treatment, chemical inputs, electricity consumption. And we can see that these are also important stages, and they contribute a lot to impacts on ecotoxicity and human toxicity. These show us that sustainable initiatives at the plant scale are really important. They are necessary. And examples of sustainable initiatives are reducing electricity consumption, selecting environmentally preferable chemical inputs, and optimizing wastewater and waste treatment. Okay, so this graph is showing us the Pakistan's exports-driven pollution in a cradle-to-gate perspective. So it's showing the impacts left behind when the manufactured goods are exported. The main categories that are impacted here are water consumption, land use, marine ecotoxicity, terrestrial ecotoxicity, and freshwater eutrophication. From this perspective, we can see that the textile sector stands out as a very relevant one, and we can see also the chemicals and chemical products sector as a relevant one as well. When we look at the situation from the gate-to-gate perspective, we have different categories, especially the toxicity and ecotoxicity ones, but also terrestrial acidification and global warming. At this perspective, we can see that the textile sector also appears as a relevant one, but also we can see that the non-metallic mineral products sector has a relevance when we look at the gate-to-gate perspective. The textile sector for this country was also selected. This selection was not only because of the LCA results, but also considering the economic relevance and the data availability as before. And as we did before for Bangladesh, in Pakistan, we've selected an important product, a relevant product. 30% of the textiles exports from Pakistan are related to the cotton product, the woven cotton products, and these products were assessed through a life cycle analysis. And we could see that the most important stage when we look at the whole life cycle from cradle to gate, we can see that the most important stage, relevant stage, was woven cotton production. And this was related to marine ecotoxicity and land occupation. The fertilizer and pesticide use is related to these impacts, and also the farming activities. Even if the cotton production stage is very relevant, we can look at the other stages, which are bleaching, batch dyeing, finishing, the textile finishing, and the article finishing. And we can see that these stages also result in many impacts, mainly associated with eco and human toxicity. These show us the importance, again, of sustainable initiatives at the plant level. So all the sustainable initiatives that are related especially to the harmful chemicals and the energy use because they are very energy intensive processes. All these initiatives can be helpful to reduce the impacts that are related to this production of these products. Now talking about Kenya, from the cradle to gate perspective, the impacts left behind when goods are exported, we can see that water consumption, land use, marine ecotoxicity, terrestrial ecotoxicity, and freshwater eutrophication are important categories. And the food and beverages sector is the most relevant one, but we can see also a strong participation of chemicals, a sector which can be considered relevant as well. When we look at the gate-to-gate perspective, then we can see that ozone formation, ecotoxicity categories, acidification, and global warming are important impact categories. And we can see that the chemical sector stands out as the most relevant one. But the selected sector was food and beverages because of the economic relevance and the data availability as well. The food and beverages sector is a very diverse one, and it's really relevant because of the environmental impacts that come from energy use, water consumption, solid waste, and wastewater treatment. And then for Kenya, we've chosen the palm oil product, which is a very relevant one for the sector. 24% of the food and beverages exports is related to crude palm oil. And when we look at the cradle to gate perspective, we can see that palm fruit bunch production is the most relevant stage due to land use and marine ecotoxicity, as we see before for the other product as well. But we can see that if we take a closer look to the other stages, the production stages, they are also associated with many impacts like ecotoxicity and human toxicity. So it's very important, again, to work in sustainable initiatives at the plant scale, especially reducing water consumption, selecting environmentally preferable chemical inputs, and optimizing wastewater treatment and waste treatment. In Tanzania, then we can see that food and beverages sector is the most relevant one from the cradle to gate perspective. And from the gate to gate perspective, again, chemical sector is a relevant one. But food and beverages was again chosen due to economic relevance also and data availability. The chosen product was sunflower oil cake, which is a byproduct from sunflower oil production. The most relevant stage when we look at from the cradle to gate perspective is the sunflower production due to marine ecotoxicity and human non-carcinogenic toxicity due to the land use and also the fertilizers used. But when you look at the other categories, the other life cycle stages, we see that all of them have relevant impacts. So at the plant level stage, we have impacts associated with ecotoxicity and human toxicity, and sustainable initiatives are again very important. Improving the performance of these manufacturing activities includes reducing energy and water consumption, optimizing transport, because it appears as well as an important stage, and selecting environmentally preferable chemical inputs, and also trying to improve wastewater and waste treatment. Okay, after these results, and after the study was concluded, we could conclude that life cycle assessment is a very powerful technique to evaluate exports-driven pollution and its related impacts. The impact results produced contain enough information to allow local governments to define target sectors or regions for implementing pollution prevention strategies. Nevertheless, there is a need to create and also to update life cycle assessment databases for these map target countries, because during this study, adaptations were needed, because not always we had the inventories specific for the geographies that we were working, and also they could be updated, because we had to use data from 2019, 2018, 2017. And this brings uncertainty to the results. It was the possibilities right now, but it would be very good to have updated and regionalized data sets. And there is also a need to create a trade database for the target countries, especially containing data in mass units, because when we have the monetary units, it's very difficult to use in life cycle assessment. And when we don't have this data, then it's impossible to conclude this study. These are our final comments, and I thank you very much. This is my email. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate.
Thank you so much, Marcela. And if anyone's got any questions out there on YouTube, please feel free to use the comment function, and we can get to those and answer them directly. If they come to you later, feel free to correspond by email. But without further ado, I'm going to just draw on some colleagues who are backstage to come and join us in a discussion and some reflection on some of the findings that this report shared with us. The panelists that are joining us are appearing. Welcome, colleagues. It's good to see everyone here today. So I wonder if a round of introductions is necessary, but maybe I'll come to you and as we circle through, and I kind of ask for individual reflections, and then as we go, I'll make those introductions in order to just keep it efficient. So maybe I'll first, what I liked a lot about this report is that it really focused in on used countries as a case study to really drive home some of the importance of how this data often can just look as slightly abstract in terms of the numbers, but then when you contextualize it within particular sectors, it becomes very relevant very quickly to the countries in which those countries that were highlighted as case studies, and one of them was Pakistan. So today we've got Mr. Redwan Sadiq, who's the first secretary of the mission of Pakistan to the United Nations in Geneva. And I want to come to you, Mr. Sadiq, to ask, in terms of what was presented, obviously the textile industry within Pakistan is crucial. It's a crucial economic driver. Mr. Hassall earlier said that, we need to be conscious of with economic growth can often come with implications in terms of pollution drivers. But what were some of your reflections about the presentation here today and the implications for trade and economic growth within Pakistan?
Thank you. Am I audible?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Firstly, let me convey thanks to UNCTAD for inviting me to this roundtable session. This topic of sustainable manufacturing and environmental pollution is an important issue under discussion at various forums. I would also like to commend UNCTAD and Instituto 17 for undertaking this study and producing the report. The report is very useful. It comes up with some practical recommendations, and very concrete ones, I would say. Pakistan is one of the countries chosen for this case study. The discussion becomes even more of interest to my delegation. In a globalized world economy, trade is among fundamental drivers of economic growth. It goes without saying. The trade creates jobs, contributes to poverty eradication. In particular, manufacturing sector provides substantial opportunities to achieve export-led growth, but is frequently associated with high levels of pollution and environmental degradation. We understand manufacturing industries are organizing themselves within developing countries, including in Pakistan. Pollution stays as a factor of concern to all of us. It is negatively affecting the development aspirations we have. There are many reasons for poor pollution management and the control in sectors that are dominated by micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, including limited capacity for investment, poor access to resources, and limited technological know-how. Weak regulatory environments and limited application of financial and policy incentives are also contributing factors. It is crucial to foster productive capacities to diversify exports and promote the necessary structural transformation to achieve sustainable development pollution-intensive manufacturing industries. Even within manufacturing industries, the report has identified two key polluting sectors, and undertaking the various factors, the report has focused on two sectors, namely food and beverages in sub-Saharan Africa and textiles and wearing apparel in South Asia. The textile industry, I would specifically talk about the textile industry as Pakistan is being studied for this particular sector. The textile industry has long been considered as one of the most polluting industries in the world. Indeed, it's true. The impact is mainly related to the use of harmful chemicals, high consumption of water and energy, and the generation of large quantities of solid and gaseous waste. Of course, many chemicals used in the textile industry cause environmental and health problems associated with water pollution caused by the discharge of untreated effluent and those because of the toxic chemicals. Textile effluent is a cause of significant amount of environmental degradation and human illness. About 40% of globally used colorants contain organically bound chlorine, and it is a carcinogen. So all these things make us convinced that there are efforts required to be undertaken. The notion of green revolution has changed the mindsets, not only internationally but nationally as well. Countries are increasing stringency of environmental regulations. There is also pressure exerted by the international buyers and consumers along the supply chains towards pollution prevention and cleaner production. Some challenges as a developing country, what I feel Pakistan faces, on one side, we wish to accelerate and deepen the integration into global trade. On the other side, more and more domestic international environmental laws are imposing restrictions on unsustainable trade, whether through tariff or non-tariff barriers such as environment, health, labor, or social standards compliance. The trade growth pollution nexus has been increasingly underlined in trade and policies and treaties worldwide. I believe it is not prudent, it is not wise to impose trade restrictions on developing countries through non-tariff barriers such as environmental. Developing countries instead should be supported through environment-friendly technology. Those technologies can make local production processes more efficient by reducing the use per unit of output, saving energy, water, and avoiding other environmentally harmful substances. By supporting economic growth and development, increased trade can affect the environment positively by enhancing the capacity to manage pollution more effectively. The report has made some practical recommendations. I would like to underscore 7 of those. Firstly, incorporation of environmental provisions in regional trade agreements and bilateral trade agreements. It is a very practical and very good. I see in the report, and even the developing countries are going to revise their old generation international investment agreements. Even the countries under study, I have seen in the report, have already several RTAs, BTAs, in which there are already and relevant environmental provisions incorporated. Pakistan, I would like to say here, is working on revising the old generation international agreements which do not contain these provisions. We have already worked on a model treaty, and that contains very explicitly the environmental social provisions in it. So it is a good practical suggestion. We are already on it. Second is enforcement, strengthening institutional capacities of the law enforcement. There are laws, but in developing countries, laws are not implemented. This is the second problem. Again, this is an area which I second, and as representative of a developing government, I believe that in developing governments, if the laws are there is need to implement and enforce those. Number third is creation of awareness among the private sector regarding the green manufacturing guidelines accessible for different manufacturing sectors and companies. Fourth is the concept of eco-industrial parks. This is very practical and very novel suggestion, and I understand it is not even novel, but it is a thing which needs to be taken, which needs to be given attention in the developing countries. Several developing countries, I know, even in Pakistan, we have the export processing zones, we have the industrial parks, but we need to establish them into eco-industrial parks. So number fifth is National Industrial Symbiosis Program. Adopting the National Industrial Symbiosis Program could enhance development in the developing countries and foster capacity building, regulatory framework, and sustainable manufacturing practices. Finally, creating the training courses on circular economy and identifying opportunities to circular across selected manufacturing sectors. This is again a very, very practical solution. Building productive capacities could be, I would say in a nutshell, a key strategy to help foster the necessary structural transformation while promoting inclusive growth and achieving sustainable development in developing countries. I would not like to put any specific question to the main presenter. I give this opportunity to the rest of the commentators to put forth the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sadiq, for your contributions there, and the context of Pakistan, which is, as you said, focusing inwards on the trade pollution nexus, and how, as developing countries, we need to be mindful of these things, but also at the same time forward economic progression. And I want to have an opportunity here to reflect with Mr. Les Bichen, who is a consultant at McKinsey, who recently drafted a report on green manufacturing in Africa, and actually focusing in on the opportunities. And you touched on this, Mr. Sadiq, when you spoke about the transfer of technology and how to, instead of creating trade barriers or trade barriers in light of pollution, but rather, having foresight for the type of implications that, for example, greenhouse gas emissions in the context of the report that Les will touch on, the green manufacturing report really focused in on, and what type of opportunities can come to the fore. So, Les, I don't know if you've got any reflections on what was presented here today, and the this vexing question about the trade pollution nexus and the type of opportunities we need to be putting forward to try and overcome some of those complicated, or some of the consequences, and in order to kind of engage with those opportunities. Les?
Thank you, Blaise, for the opportunity to comment on this. Indeed, the trade, as you call it, the trade pollution nexus is a key question when we think about the development of African countries, and I'm sure other developing countries. And it is a little bit different than what developed countries already experienced. Because when we look at today's manufacturing space in Africa, for example, almost half of its greenhouse gas emissions impact that's expected over the next 30 years doesn't exist yet. So there is a real opportunity to build green and to actually invest in these new green manufacturing sectors in order to avoid the impacts altogether, rather than getting into a situation where you need to transition later on at higher costs. Touching at the opportunities themselves, as you mentioned, one of the things that got us really excited when we looked at green manufacturing on the continent is the very high number of new potential sectors that could be developed and that have high feasibility and high market potential in Africa. So when you look at that, we looked at 24 of them, and there is a list of 8 sectors that actually have market potential of up to $10 billion in revenue by 2030 on the continent. A few examples would be manufacturing large wind turbine parts on the continent to produce renewable power here, because you can't import them, and it's already happening in some countries such as Morocco, so this could be scaled. Another example of these exciting new green businesses could be around biofuels. So this one is very interesting because you could do it, and there are some companies already doing it using waste from sugarcane processing, for example. So you would actually add the step in the value chain and then replace more polluting fuels while reducing waste from the agricultural sector. One last consideration is this is very much a discussion about pollution, about how to reduce the impacts, but it's also, we believe, a discussion about how to maximize the socio-economic impacts on the continent. Because these will be job creating and these will be revenue generating for Africa. One last number would be, if we look at a net zero trajectory for African manufacturing, by 2050, we estimate that there will be potential to create almost 4 million additional jobs in the manufacturing sector on the continent, compared to a scenario where the sector doesn't transition. And thank you, Les.
Thanks, Les. And that's a really important number to keep in the back of our minds when you think about the context within Africa, in particular, in sub-Saharan Africa, and which was one of the 2 regional focuses for this particular paper. If I could come to you, Prof. Mabratu, and from the School of Public Leadership at the Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and recently having completed some studies in 2 of these case study countries, separate research in the United Republic of Tanzania and in Kenya, respectively, as I understand it, Prof. Mabratu. And I think, could I ask maybe a question in twofold, and one for your general reflections on the report and its importance, and then secondly, I think on the key findings at the end, there was a mention around access to databases, keeping databases, or these types of analytical tools and sources of information relevant and up to date, which I think is critical. And I wanted maybe to come to you as an expert in terms of environmental pollution and the body of literature within the continent, the African continent in particular, and what are some of your challenges that you see in terms of access to data to really understand some of these implications of the trade pollution nexus, and the cost benefits, and as Les pointed out, the real the social economic gains that could potentially come from growth, but then the harmful impacts that it could have on human health from the adverse effects of pollution. So your reflections, Prof. Mabratu, that would be lovely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bless. And I would like to start by expressing my appreciation to UNCTAD, FCDO, and South North for facilitating this discussion and for the whole project on SMEP. Related to your question, I think, as we all know, life cycle analysis is very much data intensive, and the outcome you get from it is very much dependent on the quality of data you put into it. So in that context, I think it was a very brave initiative to go into life cycle analysis within developing countries context, or particularly African countries, because Africa is where it's limited, and even if wherever there is a data, even making it openly accessible is quite a challenge. So In that context, I would like to express my appreciation to the I-17 team. I think they did a very good job within considering the challenges they may have in terms of at least showing us where we are and what the possibilities could be. And this is a very good starting point. Perhaps one comment on the whole report is even in terms of motivating African countries or developing countries, both in terms of data generation and intervention and so on, it could be useful to frame the whole exercise from the perspective of the emerging and evolving process and product requirements from markets, because those are the driving forces for businesses and governments to make decisions. Just to give you an example, for example, by the way, the sectors that were picked as a priority were also the sectors that were picked in our study we carried out in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Kenya. Even the specific important pollution paths identified are similar because they reflect the reality we have in those countries. But just to relate to the point mentioned earlier about process and product requirements, if you look at, for example, in the case of Ethiopian textile sector, since the investors and the market receivers required to have certain requirement fulfilled, in each of the industry parks, they have invested a lot in putting a zero liquid discharge system, which is highly capital intensive, both in investment and operation. They have that system in place. So no wastewater goes out of these industrial parks where they generate a lot of wastewater with significant chemical loads. But the problem now they have is, on the other side, they are ending up with residual solid waste that came out of these treatment plants, where they have no possibility to dispose them anywhere or utilize them for any other thing. So one of the things we did in our exercise is, how can you deal with this residual solid waste in a more efficient way? What kind of value can you generate from that in relation to the transition to green manufacturing? So these studies and exercises hopefully will provide a good basis to encourage the countries to consider the options that have been identified in terms of addressing the pollution from life cycle perspective, not transferring it from one medium to another medium, just taking it out from the wastewater and putting it in solid waste. But how can you deal with it from life cycle perspective, starting from chemical input substitution all the way to making different products or useful products out of the waste that is generated. So the whole exercise, I think, both that has been undertaken by I-17 and our group provided a good basis for the countries to consider the different options they may have in addressing the pollution challenge that is being left behind in relation to export products. Perhaps I will stop there, and if there are any additional questions, I will come back to it. Thank you, Blaise. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mabratu, and yeah, very interesting reflections, and fascinating to hear your other example about the zero discharge solution that's being deployed in Ethiopia, and the implications that it's created in terms of the knock-on implications in terms of what's left once they've managed to remediate some of the waste. I think I do know there's a panel to come after us, so I've got lots of questions for everyone here, but it would be remiss of me not to come back maybe to Marcela and ask a question on based on your reflection and what you've heard some of the other speakers touch on. I mean, this report in total had kind of 3 recommendation areas. As I understand, the last recommendation area you touched on quite a lot, which was around kind of the life cycle assessment process and the database behind it, which I suspect is probably where given the nature of your presentation, a lot of time of yours was spent kind of generating and making and connecting the dots between these databases. But I guess my reflection is more of a discursive one and kind of semi-invited by Prof. Mabrata. But if you were so brave to do it again, what would you do differently about this particular report, and how would you frame kind of a next iteration which would contribute to the body of literature to help us understand, the implications of pollution and trade in this nexus that we've discussed? How would you do things differently? What would you do?
Yeah, I think that an important thought that can be an important thing that we can think about is circular economy, because I think that in the next panel we're going to be discussing it a little bit more. But life cycle assessment gives us a picture of the whole scenario, but this picture is based on the data that we have, with all these limitations that are inherent to this data. And things can change if we change the processes, if we change the technologies used, if we change the chemical inputs, the kind of energy fuels that are used, that are consumed, we can have the results being changed. So I think that an important contribution for our next study would be to understand how these changes could generate changes also at the results, because this would be a very would be very helpful results that could help in the discussion of the importance of changing our processes that are involved in these life cycles, these product life cycles, and understanding how we can really improve this footprint, thinking about each of the product stages, each of the flows that are involved, and trying to deal with these specific problems. As Professor Desta was saying, we need to avoid that impact is only transferred from an impact category to another one. And to do that, life cycle assessment is a very important tool, because we can understand the consequences of our changes in the model that reflects the changes in reality in the best way possible, and then we can understand which are the most valuable actions that have to be taken. And also, I think that talking about the databases, it would be very good to have primary data being collected for each of the product life cycles, at least for the most important processes, production processes that are involved in the life cycle. Because when we have primary data, then we have a picture that is is the closest picture to reality. And if we have only data inventories from databases, we have limitations, we have uncertainties. So a huge step would be to collect this primary data and work upon that, and also consider these consequences of changes in production process and production flows, to understand the consequences and to propose real actions.
Absolutely, and I mean, one of the recommendations in the report is also talking about industrial waste symbiosis programs, and I imagine with access to primary data and information feeding into those types of analysis, it starts to complete a picture of as Prof. Mabrata was saying, like the types of flows of materials, and to make sure, as you said, one consequence doesn't become another consequence in another process flow. Thank you so much to my esteemed panelists. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Piccini to take over at this point and to lead us into the next discussion or next panel of discussion. But thank you very much to all my panelists, and it's been wonderful to share the platform and stage with you, and for your report, Marcelo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Blas. Thank you for all the participants in the first panel. It was really enriching to hear the insights on LCA and the limitations of LCA, especially in a data-limited context of Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, which brings great lessons for us to work on to improve this data scarcity in order to be able to tackle improve policy and properly measure the sectors. I'm now starting the panel 2, the second part of this event. This panel will focus on a slightly different angle, the governance angle. We'll touch issues of public and private governance, covering aspects of commercial governance and also trade and at the national level as well. Without further ado, I'll give the word to the speaker who presents the governance aspects of the study made by I-17, Mrs. Lilian Bechara Elabras Veiga, who was one of the report leads. Lilian, the microphone is yours. Must be some issues with the presentation. While you tackle the presentation issue, I'll just briefly present also the commentators who will follow Lilian's presentation. Those include Mr. Mark Drek, who is the Chief Technical Advisor at Switch to Circular in UNIDO. The SMAP program has a great interest to strengthen its participation or contributions to the UNIDO project, which is very similar. So having a UNIDO representative here is quite an honor and thematically fits very well. We also have Emily Nash, who is the Regional Director for South Asia, working for Pure Earth. Emily has worked in the SMEP program before, especially in Bangladesh and Pakistan, on the issue of used lead-acid batteries and tanneries. We also have Patrick Nussbauer, who works for UNIDO and is a specialist in issues related to financing of pollution control measures. And finally, we have also Patrick Schroeder from Chatham House, who is the leading figure behind Circular Economy.Earth and has a lot of experience in circularity across value chains in developing countries. That said, let's return to Lilian for the basis presentation. Lilian, we can see the presentation, but we cannot hear you. Small technical issue. We'll give a few moments for Lilian to tackle the presentation challenge. Some of us are new on StreamYard, including myself, and we will work with it. If it doesn't work with the presentation, we will jump straight to the commentators who I imagine have a lot to say. I believe Patrick has a presentation as well, a small one, so we can start from the back and then return to Lilian once it's ready. Basically, all the the commentators also have experience on the governance aspect of pollution. Lilian and our team flagged to me on the chat if you were ready to go, or if you prefer me to send it over to the first commentator. While the presentation issue is being solved, we'll pass the word to Mr. Mark Drek from UNIDO, who is going to make some insights based on his work at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Mark, welcome. The microphone is yours.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. Can you hear me? I assume so. Let me just probably go through the same challenges as Lilian and see if I can find my my presentation. Just a second. Here it is, uploading. It says processing. Just bear with me. Yes, okay. I hope it's visible to me, so I presume it's visible to everyone. Once again, good afternoon for me, good morning for, or good evening for whoever is listening in. What I will try to do in the next few minutes is to give a bit of an insight of the project that for which I'm working as a chief technical advisor, which is Switch to Circular Economy Value Chains, and well, which does have a few entry points clearly with the report that was presented, and that is the background and the trigger of this session today. And my congratulations to the authors and the funders and all of the contributors to this report. Let me move to the next slide, if it works, and just a bit of context on what is happening and why this project is actually relevant. So, as you know, we are moving from a current, or 2019, close to 8 billion people towards 11 billion, according to predictions in 2100. Apart from the demographic growth, there's also an wealth increase, which is in itself a good thing, but up to 3 billion additional consumers are going to appear on our globe, a lot of them in the Asia Pacific region. And of course that amplifies the demand for food, for urban infrastructure, and all the energy that is related to that, and also for consumer goods. And all of that has an increasing environmental impact, water, energy, chemicals, climate change, all of that. And that creates then the demand for, or the reason for a change in that whole system. And the circular approach is the way, a way or the way that we believe can help turn this around, as a way to reduce these resource extraction and continuous use of new resources, reduce greenhouse gas emissions accordingly. And at the same time, and this is also very important, not only reduce the environmental impact, but also use that as a way to boost economic activity, to reinvent in a way enterprises and business models, and trigger the concept of green economy, if you want. Now, that isn't going by itself, obviously. And I'm looking at the chat as well, but I think everything is okay. So there's a number of clear barriers that are there, and that some of them are also mentioned in the report. So there's a lack of capacity to start with that. There's a need for financial incentives, and policy and regulatory framework is, well, often present but not sufficient, or enforcement can be an issue, and so on. Now, how this project will aim to tackle these barriers, and what is interesting or new or different about this project is that we will work very closely with industry leaders, so global value chain leaders, so multinational companies that have their supply lines into low and middle income countries. So in that sense, they do have their whole network and their presence there. And these companies have a challenge to influence the practices of their suppliers. That's what I mean with the challenge of the last mile, because regulatory pressure is coming from the EU, from others, and not only from government, but also from the market itself. The consumer is also putting pressure. So these multinational companies have a challenge, but also an opportunity, in the sense that well, they can basically lead the way of reinventing their own value chain, and they also have often the weight to do that because of the market power that they have. So the project will aim to bring these two things together and trigger circular economy practices in a number of value chains, and basically move from, let's say, the experimental phase where we are now, because it's not as if nothing is happening. There are quite a lot of initiatives already going on, but they are not mainstream. And the project will aim to show how this could happen. So in a nutshell, I show you here an overview of the project. It's a project that has started less than a year ago. It's funded by the EU. UNIDO, for which the organization for which I am working, is the lead, but we work with a number of key partners. Actually, Chatham House is one of them. Patrick Schroeder is in the same panel. So it's interesting to see. And actually, the other Patrick Nussbaumer, is my long-standing colleague in UNIDO. So I feel almost at home in this panel. And to be complete, we have two other partners in the project. Apart from Chatham House, we have Circle Economy, who is an expert group on circularity, based in the Netherlands, and we have on the financial side EIB, European Investment Bank, also as a partner. For the sake of time, I might not spend too much time on this slide, but what is important, that it gives you an overview of the overall objective, and then broken down into different outcomes and the different work streams that are going to be tackled throughout the project. So you see the knowledge, the red boxes, the knowledge on opportunities that we have to handle, the dialogue and networking for each of the value chains, capacity improvement, and then also financials, and all of that is sort of well, surrounding or will be inspired or fed by what we learn from the pilots. So these pilots are going to be extremely important, and I want to say a few more words on those in my final slide. These pilots are currently being designed. Actually, they have not started. None of them have actually started, but we did first identify the value chains, and you see them there: textile and garments, plastic packaging, and then later on we will also add ICT and electronics. So we have countries and partners that we are currently in detailed and advanced conversations with. I cannot share yet the details because we are still in the final stages of these consultations. But what I can say, of course, that is relevant also to the report that was shared, and in a way, I am then giving away some of what we are talking about, but Bangladesh will most likely be a country where we're going to work, and many of the points that were mentioned in the report are going to be very relevant. The report, if I can just spend 1 minute on that, is I found it extremely interesting. The case study on Bangladesh, I think previous speakers in the panel also mentioned how relevant and practical and useful the information on the case studies was, and I can confirm that for Bangladesh. Now, what the project will want to do is not only address sort of efficiency improvements in terms of energy, in terms of water. We want to do that as well, but we want to be more ambitious. Also seek in partnership with these corporates and their suppliers and their partners to see how we can not only change the use of water and energy and chemicals, but also how can the design of products be changed? How can business models be reconfigured? How can the system, because the system is going through a transformation because of these pressures that they are in terms of resource availability, in terms of market pressures, in terms of regulatory pressures. So the system is heading for a change, whether the industry wants it or not, and we want to look at possible ways how the whole system can be redirected, how these drivers can be benefiting obviously environment and social elements, labor laws, and come in the picture very clearly as well. But also from an economic sense, how can this continue to be an industrial and commercially important sector, but at the same time make it more sustainable. So that is what the project will aim to do. Textile and garments and plastic packaging will move in next year. I mean the implementation of these pilots will actually start, and then for ICT and electronics we will have a call for proposal, because this is done through open calls where entities, corporates can apply, and that will be launched sometime in 2022. And then the whole idea is to learn, to make a meaningful contribution at how this can actually work on the ground, and then how policy needs to be improved, which capacities need to be strengthened, how can this then form the basis for replication in the same sector and in other sectors, in the same country and in other countries, and what financial tools are then required to also support that for a replication, and for that we have all these partners that I mentioned. I have absolutely no idea how long I have spoken, maybe a bit too long, but I'll leave it at that, and I'm available for going into more depth any of that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Much appreciated. For those who don't know, Unido Switch is a program that has a similar spirit as SMAP. We both are trying to tackle manufacturing pollution. Switch has a bit of a broader geographic scope than SMAP. SMAP is focused on sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So Unido Switch, I believe it's global in principle, but it's nice to know that you are also converging in one of our target countries, Bangladesh. I've noticed also that Unido Switch is working on textiles and garments, a sector which was pointed out in the first panel as highly important for sake of control of pollution. I also look forward to the next UNIDO speaker who will be talking about financial aspects, because UNIDO Switch seeking partnerships with the private companies, which is the ideal design for this type of program. But I've been told that Lilian's presentation is now ready to go. So without further ado, I'll give the word to Lilian so that you can give us the basic presentation. Thank you, Lilian.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Enrique. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Sorry for the inconvenience, but I have some problems with my computers and I have to switch computers, but now I think it's everything okay. So with further ado, I was responsible for the private governance of production exports in I-17 report, and I'm going to walk through some of the key findings and recommendations regarding the role of public and private environmental governance in the production export nexus. So let's see how to. Well, premises of our study were, on the one hand, trade is a driver for economic growth, job creation, poverty reduction, technology and knowledge diffusion, encourages market competition, leads to higher income levels. However, trade can become a driver for pollution brought by local industrial production, negatively affecting human health and the environment. So, based on those premises, the study identified initiatives and gaps from public and private governance to control pollution of manufacturing exports. Based on those findings, some recommendations were made. Well, 4 SMAP countries were selected and analyzed in our study: Kenya, United Republic of Tanzania, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Manufacturing sectors were selected based on 2 selecting criteria: environmental, social, and economic impacts, and secondary data availability. For instance, previous research, journal papers, reports from business associations, reports from local and international agents, government information. So the selected sectors were food and beverage for Kenya and Tanzania, and textile for Bangladesh and Pakistan, in which we also considered the ready-made garment industry. So, based on the research conducted, some of the study findings for the 4 selected countries were, even though at different stages, Kenya, Tanzania, Bangladesh, and Pakistan are building diversified economies by investing in the development of a competitive industrial sector. In this sense, export-led industrialization is playing a significant role for those countries' economic growth. However, this economic growth has been accompanied by the deterioration and depletion of the natural environment, as sustainable production and sustainable trade practices are not fully adopted in those countries. Also, it's worth to mention that all the 4 countries have legal and policy frameworks to control and reduce pollution. However, they are implemented they have different stages of implementation, compliance, and effectiveness. Despite the existence of environmental policies and laws, business non-compliance is widespread. Legislation compliance failure results from lack of political will, implementation costs, absence of monitoring systems, lack of enforcement, ineffective agents, and lack of skilled human resources to enforce those laws. Those institutional and financial limits really comprise environmental policies and regulations, implementation, and effectiveness. So, as the study found out, investment in sustainability by public and private institutions will result major environmental, social, and economic gains. In the sense, international enterprises, international brands, local brands, local enterprises, local business associations, international and multinational agents are the centerpiece of this transformation that, as I said, is already happening in those countries. Here, sorry. So, in fact, the private sector is gradually recognizing the need to commit to sustainability. Major drivers pressuring companies to pursue sustainable manufacturing are, first, government through environmental policies and laws. Second, business associations through the development of programs in partnership with local government, local and international institutions. Those associations are also responsible to capacity building by offering education and training courses. It's also worth to mention the role of international brands and international funding agencies through funding projects, developing programs in partnership with local government, business associations, and companies, setting up standards and codes of conduct to which local companies must comply. We have also drivers pressure from community, market, and customers. So gradually, companies are recognizing that being an environmental friendly company is a market differentiation, a competitive advantage in local and international markets. However, this green revolution is not a reality among all companies. Business reluctance to take responsibility for the environmental and social impacts of its activities, the low willingness to comply with environmental legislation and standards still exist. Many local companies still consider legislation compliance and the adoption of environmental management initiatives as a burden due to the investment needed to implement sustainable manufacturing. So for each of the 4 selected countries and the 2 selected manufacturing sectors, the study identified initiatives, projects, and programs from enterprises, business associations, international brands, international and multinational agencies. Those programs looked for pollution reduction and sustainability achievement. Okay, so I'm going to walk through some of those initiatives in the 4 selected countries and in the 2 selected manufacturing sectors. Well, first, Kenya. Those are some of the initiatives, projects, and programs adopted by Kenyan food and beverage enterprises, business associations, international brands, and international agencies. For instance, cleaner production, environmental management certifications, development of sustainability reports, commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, the Manufacturing Priority Agenda, the Kenya National Platform on Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goals, which is a public-private partnership, the Africa Eco-Labeling Mechanism, the EcoMark Africa, the Joint Cooperation Strategy in partnership with the European Union, the Switch Africa Green Program that Mark just mentioned, okay? And as an example, you can see in this figure one of the programs that's being implemented in Kenya, which is the Switch Africa Green Program, implemented by the United Nations with financial support of the European Union. These programs assist micro, small, and medium enterprises in transition to an inclusive green economy. As you can see in the figure, results encompass water saving, wastewater reduction, energy efficiency, waste diverted from dump sites and exchanged, including industrial symbiosis practices and economic gains. Well, now for Tanzania, again, those are initiatives adopted by food and beverage companies, business associations, international brands, and international agencies. For instance, cleaner production, environmental management certification, CDM projects. Tanzania has a cleaner production center, the project on strengthening manufacturing enterprises, among others. Again, as I did for Kenya, this is an example for Tanzania. This is NBCL, a bottling and distributing soft drink company that implemented cleaner production measures. Besides the environmental achievements that you can see in the figure, for instance, water consumption, wastewater generation, electricity consumption reduction, the measures adopted also enable the company to improve in corporate social responsibility. Now it's the turn for Bangladesh. We talk about textile and ready-made garment companies. Those are the initiatives adopted by some companies, business associations, and international brands and international agencies. For instance, textile and ready-made garment companies are pursuing LEED certification, environmental management system certification, OSAs, developing sustainability reports. We have many textile standards and label being adopted. We have the Circular Fashion Partnership, which is a circular economy project, the United Nations Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. We have the Partnership for Cleaner Textile, the promotion of social and environmental standards projects, among others. As an example, I selected two apparel companies that are two ready-made garment companies that are LEED certified. You can see in the figure information regarding water efficiency, energy, air emissions reductions, and material resources conservations. It's worth to mention that in 2018, there were 70 certified LEED buildings, textile LEED buildings in Bangladesh. In 2020, this number rose to 140 units. Certified units use renewable energy sources, have effluent and sewage treatment plants in operation, and other practices. Okay, you can see in this chart in this figure as an example, the Plummy Fashion Limited achieved a 100% reduction in the potable landscape water use. R&R Jeans achieved improvement in building performance, among other initiatives. And finally, these it's Pakistan, okay? These are initiatives adopted by Pakistani textile and ready-made garment companies, business associations, and international brands and international funding agencies. For instance, EMS certification, OHA's commitment to sustainable development goals. Pakistan has a Cleaner Production Institute, a National Cleaner Production Center Foundation. It has the Industrial Sustainable Development Program. Regarding international initiatives, we have the Globe Trade Supplier Finance Program, the Partnership for Sustainable Textile, the Green Button Initiative, which is a label adopted in partnership with Germany. And as I did for the other three countries, this is an example for Pakistan, okay? These are the outcomes of Artistic Denim Mills, which is a textile and apparel company. This company received the Environment Excellent Award, recognizing its commitment to protecting the environment. It has many certifications, and those are some of the initiatives adopted by this company. For instance, Better Company initiatives, which uses 100% BCI cotton. We have also the recycled cotton, which has a recycled plant integrated with spinning. We have the Lycra T400, which uses 50% of the fiber made came from recycled PET. So the question is, how to boost the transition to a more sustainable manufacture in those four countries: Kenya, United Republic of Tanzania, Bangladesh, and Pakistan? Well, the answer is through the implementation of environmental management initiatives and tools. For instance, the development of green manufacturing guidelines accessible for the different manufacturing sectors, for the different manufacturing companies. Foster eco-industrial parks development, as none of the 4 selected countries have eco-industrial parks implemented, eco-industrial parks in operation. Also, we suggested the implementation of industrial symbiosis. It is when one company waste becomes raw material for another company. We also suggested the Environmental Management System Certification, EMS. Case studies show that EMS certification is being pursued by the 4 analyzed countries, however, with different degrees of success. Finally, we still have resource efficiency and cleaner production measures, which are being promoted in the four countries since the 90s, okay? And research shows that the research that we did shows that simple cleaner production measures may yield major environmental, social, and environmental gains. Finally, circular economy that goes along with all other environmental management instruments and tools that we presented, that we suggested. So closing the loop, contributing to natural resource conservation, contributing to pollution reduction, contributing also to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. In short, the adoption of those instruments will yield major gains to all the actors involved. By actors, I mean government, community, consumers, local and international companies, local agencies, business associations, international and multinational funding agencies. So moving from end-of-pipe solution to pollution prevention to consider sustainability a business strategy. That is part of the company, a business strategy that is part of the company decision-making process. So this path to our sustainability is not easy. We all know that. However, success relies on cooperation, partnership, and integration among all the actors involved in the whole value chain. So my final remarks is that integrating sustainability into a country development agenda is crucial if the country aspires economic growth, poverty alleviation, environmental and health improvement. Well, thank you all for your attention. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. This is my email if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Lilian, for your presentation. It's very clear. And I think you cover an underexplored area of the sustainability debate, which is the private governance world. I also liked your points on strengthening institutions, be them public or private, and equipping them with environmental management tools in all their possibilities. I also liked a lot your point on that legislation compliance can sometimes mean a burden to some companies, and that this burden means a cost burden. And I would be very happy to hear later on from Patrick Nussbaumer about the financing such solutions and how companies can be convinced and raise capital to operationalize it. But without further ado, I will pass the word to a SMAP partner from Pure Earth, Emily Nash, who has done applied work in Bangladesh and Pakistan on the sectors of used lead-acid batteries and tanneries. Emily, it's a pleasure to have you. You have the word.
Thank you so much, Enrique, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. One thing that Enrique and I had connected about regarding this topic was the issue of data scarcity, and that's come up several times, both in this session and the previous session, this kind of lack of primary data informing our understanding of the environmental and health impacts of manufacturing. So I just wanted to touch on that a bit more. And as Lilian mentioned in her presentation just now, something that we certainly encounter in our work is the the lack of institutional and financial capacity in the countries that Pure Earth focuses on to collect data and regulate these industries. So I wanted to speak a little bit about kind of how we've tried to address that problem or work within those constraints. So I can speak a bit about in our portion of the SMEP program. We worked in close collaboration with our partner organization, the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, called GAP. And part of that work was developing a hazard ranking methodology for industries, particularly in South Asia. So we developed metrics and applied those metrics for kind of leading industries in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and used kind of some novel techniques for looking at occupational health, chemical exposures, local air pollution, regional air pollution, to try to prioritize these different industries so that we can really focus our efforts on where these impacts are most severe. I also wanted to touch on the importance of kind of our cooperative approach with both industry and governments. So we've found in our experience that trust building can be a really important piece where we're not getting the data necessarily that we need from the regulatory industries. We often rely on, on the regulatory authorities. We often rely on industry itself. And we've accomplished this in various ways, but I can give one example where our work, Pure Earth's work, is very heavily focused on the used lead acid battery industry and the recycling that goes along with that can lead to high exposures of lead in surrounding communities. And we work with the International Lead Association to carry out kind of benchmark audits for formal facilities where it's not a enforcement approach, but it's a kind of a learning tool that provides feedback to the company on ways to be more both a safer operation and also a more efficient operation, to try to build in some of that economic incentive that's been mentioned several times as a major barrier to improved environmental performance.
Emily, thank you so much also for bringing the issue of data and having measurement tools to be able to parameterize those complex issues that have especially health consequences, as you said, and be able to act upon. Without data, there is no policy making, and no action can be dispensed. One thing that I also think about is, since you worked on Pakistan with the tanneries, well, the complexities around tanneries and leather production, the hunger of the world for leather is a known problem in terms of pollution. But there are some alternatives trickling into this sector. But the problem of used lead acid batteries, it's quite a challenge, because as the world tries to go to net zero and change the way we do transportation, especially in urban areas, we need to find other ways to electrify transportation without having a trade-off of people's health, dealing with low quality recycling and reprocessing of these types of materials that takes a real heavy toll on people, especially in poor countries. So there are many points that I could raise, but in order to stick to the agenda here, I'll move ahead to Patrick Nussbaumer from UNIDO, who is going to give us some interesting angles on the financing aspects for solutions to mitigate manufacturing pollution. Patrick, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Enrique, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be with you, part of this discussion, and thank you very much to UNCTAD colleagues for the invitation. My work at UNIDO, some of my work at UNIDO is focusing on investment facilitation. So we do work with projects and SMEs in frontier markets and support them in their effort to access financing. So it is through that lens that I would like to share some thoughts and experience when it comes to pollution around manufacturing. To me, there are different drivers to reduce pollutions that are at play when it comes to the way investments are flowing, both domestically and internationally. I guess the bottom line for mobilizing private capital is creating value, obviously, or avoiding the destruction of value that would be created. So with that in mind, the environmental regulation that is in place in most countries, for a company, the choice is either to comply with those and possibly invest in some pollution mitigation measures and equipment, or to take the risk to be exiting the market through the pressure of the regulator. So from an investment perspective, the interest there is not so much to look into solutions such as filters or dust collectors. If I look at the opportunities that have been identified in the UNCTAD report, but the interest of the investor there is to preserve the core activities and the value that is thereby created. But beyond that, we see in our work that there are a lot of opportunities to create value from those waste streams. And again, referring to the UNCTAD report, there are some of those opportunities that are highlighted there. For instance, valorizing waste streams on organic material, to use those to produce energy that is in turn used by the company. So on the one hand, you solve a pollution issue. On the other hand, you are able to reduce your cost that you would otherwise incur by buying the energy or the electricity that you put. There are other opportunities highlighted in that report, including recycling and closing the loop along the line of the examples that my colleague Mark mentioned earlier in this session. But let us be clear, the cheapest pollution is obviously the one that is not produced to start with. So from that perspective, we see interesting trends in the market, and one of them is around servitization. So moving away from selling products to selling services, and the same trend takes place in the context of energy. So if you take the example of an SME that is active in the food and beverage sector, often in our experience, there is little interest for that small company to invest in energy generation capacity. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the technology. Now, if you put that in the hands of another company that is specialized in energy, and what the interface between those two companies is the selling of the services, you have a dramatic change in the roles and responsibility, with as a consequence, we see a more efficient use of the resources and a significant reduction in the pollution. So that is definitely an interesting trend. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that all the investments that are required around resource efficiency, cleaner production, pollution mitigation, they are very small in nature. So the transaction costs around those is disproportionate. So finding ways to aggregate that demand is absolutely critical to make a difference there. There are a few trends that I see happening in the investment community that are, I think, conducive to reducing pollution in the manufacturing sector. The first one is a broad trend across all investors that I interact with, ranging from those that are experts, specialized, all the way to the mainstream commercial investors. All of them are putting thoughts into greening their portfolio. And they do that because they feel it is important, but they also do that because they have pressure from their own shareholder. So there is a trend to align to the Paris Agreement, for example, and other environmental agreements, which opens opportunities for reducing pollutions in the manufacturing sector. So there is a rise of the importance of environmental, social, and governance criteria in investment decisions that I think is making a key difference in this space. In addition to that, there is a lot of capital that is becoming available for impact investing. So going beyond managing the risk, if you want, but looking for explicit positive impact when it comes to environmental issues or other social and development issues. There are also regulations that are coming at play here when it comes to investors. And the one that I would like to mention is the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance. So you might ask me, why EU policy in the context of this discussion about Bangladesh, Kenya, and Pakistan? Well, in the future, every single dollar or euro, for that matter, that will flow into an investment, either directly or indirectly, from a financial institution or an investment structure that is domiciled in the EU will need to comply with that taxonomy. In addition to that, some of the thinking in that taxonomy is also being used as best practice in other markets. And there are three elements in that EU taxonomy that I think are relevant for this discussion. The first one is that it looks at multiple environmental dimensions. So not good enough if you want to reduce pollution in water, but you need through that piece of work to also check the other environmental dimension and have a do no harm principle. And I think this is a game changer because there are often, as we know, trade-off between environmental dimensions, and this makes those trade-offs explicit. Second, it pushes the thinking towards a life cycle perspective. So similar to the work that UNCTAD has just commissioned in going beyond the gate-to-gate perspective, if you want, investments are now looking at what is upstream as well as what is downstreams when it comes to those investment decisions. And then third, there is an element there of best available technology. So we're not going for the incremental progress, if you want, but looking for whatever is best available in the market. So in conclusion, there are various trends in the way financing is flowing for investments in manufacturing. There is a combination of push and pull factors, which I think is conducive to reducing pollution. There are relations available for companies and investors alike, and there is a market dynamic and opportunities to create value from reducing pollution through various solutions and innovative business models. So I'll leave it there and back to you, Enrique. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. I really liked your comments, especially since we apparently we are facing a dual challenge here, a micro challenge of factories trying to improve the pollution footprint, looking at the up and downstream and also the gate-to-gate at the factory level, and also a larger game, a macro perspective of this ongoing redesign of financial systems worldwide, trying to channel more money towards ESG compliant assets or companies in the end. So this is an important thing also for strategies of countries and producers looking at the long run and the sustainability and availability of finance for their operations. I will pass now the word to our final commentator here, who has produced a website that I use very often, circulareconomy.earth, as part of his work in Chatham House. Patrick Schroeder, please, the word is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, Enrique. Thanks for inviting me to join this panel. And I'm very pleased to hear that you're using the circulareconomy.earth platform. I was wondering if maybe, because I haven't prepared slides, but maybe I can share my screen to show the platform. Are you able to see this?
Not yet. I will only see your video.
Maybe maybe it's not working. I think it's not working that I can share. So in any case, so it's a site that we set up about a year ago. It's circulareconomy.earth. I can maybe put this in the chat. It's based on our work that we're trying to understand the global dimension of the circular economy. So the site is an interactive tool that can be used to visualize and also to analyze various data sets, especially the UNCTAD data that use the HS codes to understand the global trade of secondary materials and various waste streams. And okay, great, thanks for posting it. So, for instance, you can use this tool to understand how various countries or regions trade various products ranging from scrap metals, plastics, secondhand textiles, rubber products, various metals, etc. And for instance, what we've seen, there's also a time dimension to it. So trade in those secondary materials has tripled over the last 20 years. So around 2000, it was below 100 billion per year. And in 2019, it was already over 3 billion. So it's a useful tool to always understand how the circular economy and trade has developed over time. However, there's also, what the tool has also shown us there are a number of gaps. So the HS codes, for example, don't cover all the products that are traded internationally. So there needs to be some improvement in that system to be able to capture all the trade that's taking place. One of the new developments will be that there's going to be a new HS code for e-waste that will be that comes into play in January 2022, which is great. And because that's been an area that was pretty much, or is also a blind spot. And the reason why this is important is because trade in waste materials is also an issue of global concern, in particular dumping of waste products from industrialized countries to the global south. It's a big topic also for Interpol, for instance. Illegal trade in waste is one of the major international organized crimes. And so to really get on top of this, but also in a way to make this trade more efficient, a lot more data and transparency is needed. So what we see, there's increased need also for basically traceability. And we see there are huge potentials now with lots of new tools coming into play, including blockchain-based applications. In the EU context, there's a lot of talk about digital product passports. All these will be important elements in making the circular economy work through trade on an international level. And this will have also implications for the manufacturing sectors in the target countries of SMAP, but across the world. And so in a way, actually there's a couple of other things I wanted to mention, which relates to a recent study that we've done looking at the existing literature on circular economy and trade. And this has been published in the journal Circular Economy and Sustainability. And there are a number of important findings from that review. And one of those is we try to summarize the recommended actions that have been promoted or proposed through those several dozens of publications that we went through. And one is there needs to be more alignment between circular economy, development, cooperation programs, and the trade. So that was actually one of the most relevant recommendation that we picked up. So, which indicates that programs like SMAP or the switch to circular value chains are really key to make this work. I mean, some of the other recommendations that were proposed, and they are quite obvious, really, if you think about it. So there's important aspects about closing export loopholes, especially relating to EPR, but also improve the enforcement of to cut down on illegal waste trade. There's also mention about the role the WTO has to play in this. So there's also this connection between national policies that promote circular economy, including EPR, national action plans, roadmaps, sustainable procurement, and the trade dimension to that, and various trade policies. And that hasn't been systematically understood yet, how these national policies interlink with the trade and the value chains. Maybe I'll stop here. I just looked at the time, and I'm probably already over my limit.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I think that you spoke well about the road not taken, because we in the event today we discussed the pollution effects of manufacturing and exports from a cradle to gate, or perhaps to exit gate perspective. We do not look at the downstream. And Circular Economy.Earth and your work has been heavily focused on contributing to the downstream effects of pollution, because pollution doesn't stop when the product leaves the factory. It continues throughout the supply chain or to the destination markets, be them local or be them in another continent. So having transparency also on the downstream is very important, and perhaps can be considered in a future LCA analysis. So in order to conclude, I would just like to raise some small points here that perhaps could be in our minds for the future. We have the health angle, which was raised by Pure Earth, a very important thing to keep into account. We don't want only to maximize economic or export or business efficiency. We want to remove the barriers to social development, especially health, which is starting from the work of the Lancet Commission. It was very clear that health issues are an economic drag. So pollution should be seen from the health angle as well, with proper measurement tools to numerically assess the size of the problem so that we can act on it. The second point was the LCA inventories. It's very important to continue producing more data so that the LCA analysis, life cycle analysis, can be done with regionally adjusted data for future studies. And this is an ongoing process. It's an important one, because a garment produced in Bangladesh, another one produced in South Africa, will probably have different LCA impacts if the inventories are adjusted. So the other thing is finance, the micro world of finance, in terms of having a factory equipped or retrofitted with circularity enhancing tools or pollution control mechanisms, at the same time as the large financial systems, or the macro world of finance, is routing itself towards funneling finance towards environmentally compliant sectors. So those two have to match. It's a mid to long term process, but those who do not invest on it will be out of the game, or have problems with financing in the near future. And finally, a point that was raised by some colleagues, like the Pakistani diplomat, the producer is not only to blame, the country producing things are not only to blame. Just like in climate change, the buyer also shares the responsibility, not only of the burden, but also the opportunity to make a better production, exports, and the global supply system. Okay, without extending myself further, I'd like to thank the I-17 for the study provided. It was very well done. Thank you, Lilian, and thank you, Marcella, for your presentations, and also to our donor, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK, for supporting the Sustainable Manufacturing Environmental Pollution Program, and also for the UNIDO colleagues, Switch, which is a partner initiative in the spirit of SDG 17, for joining us here today. Thank you so much.